Fog lay thick over the abandoned train station, curling through broken beams and rusted rails like pale fingers searching for the living. The wind scraped along the platform boards, winding through warped gaps, carrying the smell of soot and something older, something forgotten. She sat there against a cracked support post, wrists raw from rope, her head tilted just enough to watch the horizon blur. Her dress was torn to hem, clinging heavy with dust. She wasn't sure how long she had been left like that. Time had lost its meaning somewhere between the moment she woke bound and the fading sound of hoofbeats disappearing into the fog. Footsteps emerged before shapes did. 2 sets, light but deliberate, crunching across the gravel bed. The mist parted just enough to reveal them. Twin boys, no older than 14, moving as if guided by one mind. Their clothes didn't match. One wore a jacket 2 sizes too big, the other a shirt frayed at the elbows, but both had the same wary eyes, sharp and sun-darkened, the kind that had learned early to measure strangers. They stopped a few feet away. "Take my husband," one said, his voice flat, but carrying weight far older than his years. "He's gone." She stared, confused. The boy's words hung in the air, not like a request but a verdict. The other twin shifted his satchel higher on his shoulder, glancing toward the empty tracks. Neither moved closer until she asked, her throat tight, "What do you mean?" "We can't leave you here," the first replied, not with them still looking. His tone left no room for questions, but she had too many to name. The rope bit her skin as she shifted, without hesitation. The second boy stepped forward, drawing a small knife from his belt. His hand was steady as he sliced through the coarse fibers. The moment her wrists were free, she rubbed them, half expecting the boys to vanish into the mist like figments. Instead, they stood there, watching her with an unblinking patience. "Can you walk?" the first asked. She nodded, though her legs trembled as she pushed herself upright. Every instinct told her to demand answers, but the urgency in their manner warned that questions would slow them down. The station stretched behind her in silent decay, doors swinging on single hinges, windows clouded with years of grime. Whatever purpose it once had was gone, replaced by an emptiness that pressed against her ribs. The twins turned, and she followed. The ground beyond the station was hard and dry, cracked from months without rain. Weeds shivered against the wind. Somewhere far off, thunder muttered, low and uncertain. They moved quickly, their path cutting between brittle fence posts and long-forgotten rail ties. "You have somewhere to go?" she asked, her voice still hoarse. "Yes," the first said. The second added, "But we can't talk here." Their silence unnerved her. It was not the guarded quiet of fear, but something heavier, like they were carrying words they dared not speak in open air. She kept pace despite the ache in her legs, watching the way they scanned their surroundings, heads turning in perfect unison. The first drops of rain came sharp as pinpricks, carried on a wind that changed direction without warning. By the time the sky darkened, the storm was already building, a restless wall rolling in from the west. The twins quickened their pace, guiding her down a shallow ravine where an abandoned barn leaned at an uneasy angle. Its boards were warped, roof sagging in the middle, but it offered shelter. Inside, shadows hung thick. Dust rose in lazy spirals when they stepped across the creaking floor. The boys set down their satchel in the corner, pulling from a blanket a tin of bread and a small wrapped bundle that they didn't open. She noticed the way their hands lingered near it, protective. "Rest here," the first boy said. "It's safer until the rain passes." She sat on the blanket, pulling her knees up, the chill already sinking into her bones. Her mind ran in circles, trying to piece together the moments before she'd found herself at the station. She remembered being on the road, heading west, the air thick with heat. Then, a rider's shadow falling across her path, the glint of steel, a voice she couldn't place. After that, only flashes, the smell of smoke, rough hands, the sensation of being dragged. The barn shuddered under the wind's howl. Rain began in earnest, slashing against the boards, dripping through cracks to form cold little pools on the floor. The twins sat across from her, speaking to each other in low murmurs she couldn't catch. Their voices carried a rhythm, an unbroken thread of shared thought, like they'd been having the same conversation their entire lives. Her eyes closed for what felt like a moment, But when she opened them again, the rain had eased. The storm's tail dragged its darkness eastward, leaving behind a pale, bruised light. She shifted, the sound drawing the boy's attention. The second one leaned toward the first, whispering something too soft to hear. "I'm not going to slow you down," she said, though part of her wondered if she'd already done so. The first boy studied her for a long beat, then nodded once. "We have to move at first light. It's still a long way." "To your husband?" she asked. His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. The second one's gaze flicked toward the door, the set of his shoulders changing. She caught it then, a faint sound beyond the barn, not the wind, not the settling of boards. Hoofbeats. Slow, measured, coming closer, then stopping. Every muscle in her body went still. The twins didn't move, but their eyes sharpened. Through a narrow gap in the wall, she caught a glimpse, a rider at the edge of the clearing, a silhouette against the thinning mist. The figure sat there, unmoving, watching. The horse shifted, stamping once. Then, as if deciding something, the rider turned and melted back into the trees. The sound faded, but the air in the barn stayed taut. The first boy rose, checking the bundle in the satchel before settling down again. His voice was barely a whisper when he said, "We keep going at dawn. No stops. No talking unless we have to." She wanted to demand answers, to refuse to be pulled into whatever web they were tangled in. But she had seen enough in the rider's stillness to know that staying alone wasn't an option. Whatever danger was on their trail, it had already found her once. The rain began again, softer this time, a steady patter on the roof. She lay down on the blanket, the sound threading through the silence. Her thoughts circled the boy's words at the station, trying to untangle them. "Take my husband. He's gone." Gone where? Gone how? The questions would have to wait, but the weight of them pressed down as surely as the storm's damp air. When her eyes closed again, it wasn't from peace, but from the certainty that whatever tomorrow brought, it would demand more from her than she had left to give. Yet still, she would follow. Dawn broke without warmth, the pale light washing over the barn's warped boards and pooling in the hollows where the floor had sunk. She woke to the sound of the twins moving in quiet synchrony, packing the satchel and tightening the bundle's wrap. Their faces were drawn, eyes shadowed from a night spent half listening for trouble. Outside, the air held the dam by the rain that had not fully left. They started walking before the sun cleared the trees, moving along a narrow trail that snaked between ridges of dry earth. Her legs ached from the previous day's strain, but the pace they set left no room for complaint. Every so often, one twin would glance behind them, his gaze sweeping the trail as though expecting to find a shadow in their wake. She wanted to ask who it was they feared, but the question stayed unspoken. The way they kept their voices low told her enough. Answers were dangerous in the open air. The land around them bore the scars of drought. Grass lay flat and brittle. Streams ran shallow over beds of cracked stone. Overhead, vultures circled, their silhouettes cutting against the washed-out sky. The world felt emptied of safety in every sound. A snapped twig, a stone rolling underfoot, set her pulse a little faster. By midday, the trail descended into a stretch of blackened ground. Charred stumps jutted like broken teeth, the air still faintly carrying the tang of old smoke. Her steps slowed, eyes sweeping over the remnants of what had once been a small settlement. Ash clung to the edges of collapsed structures, and she caught glimpses of rusted hinges where doors had once swung. The boys didn't look at the ruin as they passed through. They moved quickly, their faces shuddered, as if this place was a wound they refused to reopen. A faint movement caught her attention, a figure on the far side of the clearing, partially obscured by the tilt of a scorched wall. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a dark braid hanging down his back. His posture was watchful, but not tense. When he stepped forward, she saw the lines of weather and hardship etched into his face, the faint sheen of old scars along his cheekbone. He stopped a few paces away, eyes meeting the twins first. No words passed between them, but a slow nod from the boys seemed to bridge something unspoken. The man's gaze shifted to her, assessing, not unkind but without softness. She felt herself straighten under the weight of it. He spoke a single word in a language she didn't understand, and one twin replied in the same tongue. The exchange was brief, yet she sensed agreement in it. The man stepped aside, gesturing for them to follow him through what remained of the settlement. They reached a narrow gully where a trickle of water ran clear over stones. Without ceremony, the man knelt, filled a canteen, and handed it to her first. She hesitated before drinking, the cool water sharp against her dry throat. She tried to offer thanks, but he had already turned to scan the ridges beyond. They rested only long enough to fill their flasks before moving on. The man took the lead now, his pace sure, his eyes always searching the terrain ahead. She noticed the ease with which he moved. Silent, deliberate, as though each step had been measured before it landed. The twins matched his rhythm without effort, and she realized this was not their first time traveling together. That evening, they made camp in the hollow of a dry creek bed, the walls rising just high enough to hide their fire's glow. The man gathered wood without a word, the twins arranging stones for cooking. She sat apart, her mind turning over the day's impressions. Whoever this man was, he had earned the boys' trust, and that was no small thing. Later, as the fire settled into embers, the man approached her. He offered a strip of dried meat, and when she accepted, he studied her as though trying to decide whether she belonged in this small, fragile circle. "Waya," he said finally, tapping his chest. His voice was low, steady. She gave her own name, and his eyes flicked briefly toward the twins, as if noting their reaction to hearing it. They didn't speak, but their gazes lingered on her for a heartbeat longer than usual before returning to the fire. Something about that exchange tightened the air. Sleep came slowly. The ground was cold, the walls of the creek bed funneling every whisper of wind. She lay listening to the crackle of dying embers and the quiet shifts of bodies and blankets. Somewhere in the dark, Wyatt moved, his footsteps nearly soundless. She saw him pause at the edge of camp, head tilting toward the distance, before vanishing into the night. He returned before dawn with a faint sheen of mud on his boots. Without waking the twins, he crouched near her and spoke in a tone that needed no translation. "Riders. Clothes. Less than a day behind." The words dropped into her stomach like stones. She glanced at the twins, sleeping curled together, their faces slack in rest. Whatever was inside that bundle they guarded so fiercely was worth someone chasing them across scorched land, worth tying strangers to rotting posts to get to it. When the twins woke, they didn't seem surprised by Wyatt's report. Instead, they ate quickly, packed in silence, and began moving before the first light had fully lifted. Wyatt took the rear now, his eyes never still. By afternoon, they reached the edge of a river swollen from recent rains. The water was a restless churn, frothing white where it slammed against half-submerged logs. There was no bridge, only a narrow stretch where rocks jutted from the current like jagged stepping stones. The first twin crossed with practiced ease, leaping from rock to rock. The second was halfway across when his foot slipped on a moss-slick stone. He lurched sideways, the satchel swinging wildly, his arms flailing. In an instant, Wyatt was in the water, the current tugging hard at his legs as he reached for the boy. His hand closed around the twin's arm, yanking him upright and shoving him toward the next rock. Together, they made it to the far bank, dripping but unbroken. Her turn came, and her breath caught at the force of the river's pull. She moved slower, every step deliberate, the sound of rushing water loud in her ears. When she reached the bank, her knees shook with relief. Wyatt offered no words, just a brief nod before turning to scan the trail behind them. They pressed on until dusk, stopping only when the light had thinned to shadows and the trees thickened enough to hide them. The twins huddled close to the fire that night, whispering in low tones. She caught fragments, mentions of him and not ready yet, but the rest was lost to the wind. Lying awake, she felt the weight of the journey pressing in. Whatever waited at the end of this road was not merely a place, but a reckoning. The boys carried in their careful silences, Wyatt in his unblinking watch. And now, without knowing why, she carried a part of it too. Tomorrow, the chase would close in, and when it did, there would be no turning back. The trail narrowed as it climbed into the hills, the air turning cooler, sharper, as if each step cut a little deeper into the wilderness. Rocks jutted like broken spines from the earth, and the trees leaned inward, their branches knitting a canopy that muted the light. The twins moved ahead with renewed urgency, their small frames cutting quick, deliberate paths through the underbrush. Wyatt followed at the rear, his gaze sweeping behind them at intervals too regular to be anything but calculated. She walked between them, feeling the weight of the silence pressing against her ribs. By mid-afternoon, the land leveled into a hidden clearing, a narrow stream wound through it, fed by a spring that bubbled quietly at the far edge. In the center, half shielded by a tangle of pines, stood a cabin no larger than a single room. Its roof sagged at one corner, but the door hung straight, and smoke curled faintly from a stone chimney. The first twin knocked once, then pushed the door open without waiting. Inside, the air smelled of pine pitch and damp wool. Against a far wall, propped on a narrow cot, lay a man. His skin was pale beneath the stubble shadowing his jaw, his chest rising shallowly beneath a patched blanket. One leg was bound from hip to ankle, the cloth stained dark in places where it had not fully dried. The man's eyes opened slowly, their pale blue clouded with exhaustion, but the sight of the twins drew a flicker of life into them. "You made it," he rasped, voice rough from disuse. His gaze shifted to her, unreadable. The first twin set the satchel on the floor, unwrapping the bundle they had guarded so closely. Inside lay a worn revolver, a small pouch of cartridges, and a folded scrap of paper. The boy handed the revolver to the man without a word. He accepted it with a grin set to his mouth, checking the cylinder before setting it within reach. She stood at the threshold, unsure whether she was intruding. Wyatt slipped past her and crouched beside the cot, murmuring something in his own tongue. The man nodded once, then closed his eyes briefly, as if the effort of speaking had drained him. It was the first twin who broke the stillness. "They'll be here soon. We saw a sign yesterday." "How far?" the man asked. "Half a day, maybe less." Her breath caught. "Who?" The second twin looked at her then, his expression carrying both reluctance and inevitability. "The men who left you at the station. They weren't just passing through. They were waiting for us to come back." She felt the floor tilt slightly under her. "Why use me?" The first twin's answer was quiet but sharp. "Bait works better when it breathes." The man on the cot shifted, grimacing. "We have one night to set it right," he said, his voice gaining an edge of command. "Wyatt, the ridge to the north still holds cover?" Wyatt nodded. "Then we use it. Keep them thinking the cabin's empty until they're close enough to see otherwise." His gaze moved to her. "Can you shoot?" She hesitated. Memories of her father's old rifle, its weight awkward in her hands, surfaced like something long buried. "I can," she said. "Good. You'll take the east window. They'll try to flank from that side." They moved quickly after that. The twins gathered stones to reinforce the lower edges of the walls. Wyatt set snares along the narrow approach paths. She helped where she could, her hands finding tasks without being told, hauling water from the stream, laying ammunition where it would be easy to reach. The man's presence, though confined to the cot, seemed to fill the cabin, his instructions short but precise. By the time the sun dropped behind the ridge, the forest had grown too quiet. The usual rustle of small creatures was absent, replaced by the brittle snap of a branch far in the distance. They took their positions as the last light drained from the clearing. The first shot came just after full dark, a sharp crack that splintered the cabin's front frame. She ducked instinctively, heart pounding. Wyatt answered with two quick shots from the north ridge, the reports echoing back through the trees. Figures shifted in the shadows, their movements quick, testing. She steadied herself at the east window, the rifle's barrel cold under her fingers. A shape emerged between the pines. Low, fast. She squeezed the trigger, the recoil jarred her shoulder. The figure dropped. Somewhere to her left, one of the twins fired from a narrow slit in the wall. The air thickened with smoke and the acrid sting of gunpowder. Shouts cut through the dark, commands and curses tangled together. The gang pressed closer, their shots cracking against the reinforced walls. A bullet tore through the wood inches from her head, showering her with splinters. She shifted position, breath tight, and fired again. Through the chaos, she saw Wyatt move, slipping from shadow to shadow, his knife flashing once before vanishing into the dark again. A cry followed, then silence. The first twin called her name sharply. She turned in time to see the second twin grapple with a man forcing his way through the window frame. She dropped the rifle, lunged, and caught the intruder's arm, wrenching it backward until he lost his grip. The boys scrambled free, and together they shoved the man back out into the night. The fight surged in broken waves. Twice she thought they had driven the gang off, only for the attackers to circle and press again. Her arms ached, her ears rang, but each time she found herself moving without hesitation, loading, firing, shifting position. Fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her. Then came the moment she had not expected. A shadow filled the window, broad and unmoving. The man who stepped through carried no weapon at first, only the weight of recognition. His face was seared into her memory from the day she was taken. His voice the one that had ordered the rope. "You should have stayed tied," he said, his tone almost casual. Her hands tightened on the rifle. He took a step closer, slow, testing. "Move, and I'll let the rest walk," he offered. She didn't move. His smile was thin, humorless. The shot she fired was steady, deliberate. He crumpled without another word. The others broke after that, retreating into the trees with the sound of Wyatt's rifle chasing them. The forest swallowed the noise, leaving only the ragged pull of her breathing and the faint crackle of the fire they had kept low. When it was over, the cabin felt smaller, the walls holding the night at bay, but not the knowledge of what had nearly happened. The man on the cot was still alive, though pale, his eyes holding a new measure of her. The twins moved quietly, checking ammunition, gathering supplies as if they might leave at any moment. She sank onto the edge of the cot, the rifle resting across her knees. Her hands were steady now. Wyatt passed behind her, pausing just long enough to meet her gaze. The nod he gave was small, but it carried the weight of trust earned. Morning would come, and with it choices she had not imagined making. But for now, they had held the line, and that was enough to keep moving forward. The first light of dawn bled slowly through the trees, turning the mist in the clearing into a shifting veil of silver. The air was damp, carrying the faint metallic scent of spent gunpowder and the sharp tang of pine sap cut during the night's defense. She stood just outside the cabin, her eyes tracing the dark edges of the forest where the attackers had vanished. The silence was heavier now, not the stillness of peace, but the fragile pause that comes when danger withdraws to lick its wounds. Behind her, the cabin creaked with the low movements of waking bodies. The twins emerged first, one carrying a revolver, the other holding the pouch of cartridges they had guarded since the station. Their faces were paler in the morning light, but their movements carried the same measured purpose as before. Wyatt stepped out last, scanning the tree-line with the same deliberate patience he had shown since she met him. Inside, the man on the cot, father to the twins, was propped higher against the wall, his injuries still bound. He had the look of someone measuring how much longer he could endure before the body gave out. His eyes found her as she stepped back inside. "They'll be back," he said plainly, no trace of doubt in his tone. "I know," she replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "Then you also know we can't wait for them to choose the ground." His gaze shifted to Wyatt, who gave a slow, deliberate nod. The plan formed quickly. They would move before midday, using the narrow trails Wyatt knew, winding deeper into the hills where the forest thickened and the ground offered natural choke points. From there, they could decide whether to push further west or circle back toward the rail line under cover of night. It wasn't safety they were after, only a better chance. As they prepared to leave, she found herself standing near the twins, watching them check the straps of the satchel. "What's inside?" she asked quietly. "That makes them follow you so far?" The first twin hesitated, then glanced toward his father. The man gave a slight nod, granting permission without words. The boy opened the satchel, lifting out a folded oilcloth. Inside was a ledger, its leather cover worn but intact. Pages inside were filled with tight, precise handwriting and numbers that made no immediate sense. "They've been bleeding this land for years," the second twin said, his voice low. "Taxes that aren't real, debts that never end. This is proof, names, amounts, deals they never meant to honor." She stared at the pages, understanding dawning with a slow, heavy weight. The gang wasn't just a band of outlaws. They were enforcers for something larger, something that thrived on keeping people desperate. The ledger was more than evidence. It was a weapon. "Why give it to me at the station?" she asked. "You weren't supposed to take it," the first twin said. "You were supposed to lead them to us. But when we saw you, we decided you might help instead." There was no flattery in his tone, only the blunt assessment of someone who had already weighed the risks. She folded the oilcloth again, feeling its weight in her hands before tucking it back into the satchel. They left the cabin in single file, the twins ahead, their father supported between them for the first stretch. Wyatt moved behind, his rifle slung across his back, his eyes scanning for movement in the underbrush. The trail narrowed quickly, forcing them into a slow, careful pace. The forest here was older, the trees thick and close, their roots gripping the earth like anchors. Shafts of sunlight speared through the canopy in thin, fractured beams. Birdsong returned in hesitant bursts, as though testing the air. By midday, they reached a rise that overlooked a narrow pass between two ridges. Wyatt stopped, crouching low. From the shadow of the ridge opposite, movement flickered. 3 riders, moving slow, their heads turning as they searched. "They're tracking us," she whispered. "Let them," Wyatt said, voice flat. He led them down a side path, circling to higher ground. The twins moved without question, their father silent but watchful. She followed, each step a reminder of how far she had come from the woman tied to a post at the station. Fear still pricked at her, but it no longer rooted her in place. It pushed her forward. They reached a rocky ledge that overlooked the pass from above. Wyatt motioned for silence, then gestured toward the twin with the revolver. The boy lay flat, eyes fixed on the riders below. No shot was fired. Instead, they waited, letting the gang drift deeper into the choke point. When the moment came, it wasn't gunfire that started it. It was the snap of a rope. The snares Wyatt had set the night before caught the first horse, sending its rider tumbling hard onto the rocks. The second bolted sideways, throwing the man from its back. The third tried to turn, but Wyatt was already moving, dropping from the ledge to cut off the retreat. The fight was quick, brutal. Wyatt's rifle cracked once, sending one man sprawling. The twins moved like shadows, flanking the others, their small frames darting in and out of reach. She stayed on the ledge, watching for any sign of more riders, her hands tight on the rifle. When it was over, 2 men lay unconscious, the third gone into the trees. Wyatt didn't chase. He returned to the ledge, his face unreadable. "Not all," he said simply, meaning the threat wasn't gone. They didn't linger. By the time the sun began its slow drop toward the horizon, they had put miles between themselves and the pass. They stopped in a small hollow where a stream whispered through mossy stones. It wasn't safety, but it was hidden, and for now that was enough. That night, as the twins slept close to their father, she sat by the low fire, turning the day's events over in her mind. The ledger was never far from her thoughts. Its existence tied all their fates together now, just as much as the men hunting them. She realized that whatever choice she made next would decide whether the twins grew up in a land ruled by fear, or one where their proof could spark something better. Wyatt sat across from her, the firelight catching the faint curve of a smile that wasn't quite amusement. "You stay," he said, more statement than question. She thought of the station, of the rope biting into her wrists, of the rider in the mist. She thought of the twins' unblinking eyes, of the ledger's pages, of the father who could not yet walk without help. "I stay," she answered. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain from the west. Somewhere beyond the darkness, the men who wanted what they carried would be moving again, drawn by the same trail they had been following since the start. She didn't know if they would reach the end of this road, or what it would look like if they did, but she knew she would walk it with them. In the quiet that followed, she felt the smallest measure of peace, not the kind that comes from safety, but from knowing where you stand when the storm breaks.